Thank you for coming to hear me speak today, and thank you to Herb and the team for inviting me. It's a real privilege to be here. It's actually really cool to be in Manchester on Tony Wilson Way. What a kind of visionary he was. So I'm going to talk to you today about some of the lessons that I've picked up throughout my career that kind of inform what I do at Twitter. So without giving too much away, let's get started. So this is me. My @handle is my name. It's very unoriginal. Everyone says like when you join Twitter, like, oh, you're gonna have a cool name, but no, that's my name. That's who I am. I'm never letting that go. While I was putting this together, I realized that maybe not everyone knew what product manager meant, like what that role actually entailed. It's sort of something that began in the, I guess, dot-com boom in the late 90s, early 2000s, and still no one really knew what it was. No one knows what it is today. There's not really a degree that you can do in product management. So it's sort of like this mystical role. While I was putting this together, I set out trying to find out what is a product manager. So I Googled it. That wasn't particularly helpful. So instead of cheating, I sat down and thought about it. And this is really my take. I believe that it's a product manager's job to make sure that three things happen. First of all, number one, I think this is maybe the most important, the product we build is the right one. There are thousands of ideas for new features, for brand new products, for improvements that we can make, but you only get to do one thing at a time. So you need to make sure that actually that thing's the right one. Number two, that it gets shipped on time and budget. It's all well and good having the right idea, but if it takes you like 2 years to build it, then that boat has sailed and you're no longer relevant. And then three, and I think this is sometimes overlooked, that you need to make sure that the team and the stakeholders are aligned, because if your sales team don't believe in the thing that you're building, then it's not going to sell. Similarly, like if marketing don't get it, then they're not going to be able to put the message out there. And your team who are building it, if they don't really understand what you're doing, then it's going to take you a lot longer to get to the nugget of that. So when I say the right product, I think that means that it needs to ensure that there's kind of the correct intersection of these three things. So UX is the kind of design, is the feel of it correct? Like, does it feel good? Are we solving an actual problem that people have? Second of all, like, are we actually going to get this built on time? Like I said, is this viable? We sort of say in tech, like, dream it up and we can build it. That's true, but you also need to make sure that it's kind of possible for your team in the time frame that you have. And then I think thirdly, and this is kind of maybe unique for a product manager, does it further the business's goals? Like, this might be a cool idea, but is it actually going to make us any money? Are people actually going to use it? So that's sort of, I guess, like philosophically how I see product management. And I guess the part of Twitter that I care about is this concept that if it's happening in the world, then it's actually happening now on Twitter, and often it's happening on Twitter first. So while I was putting these slides together, this was actually a tweet that came up in my tweet deck, and I don't know if you remember this, it was a couple of weeks ago now. There was a train crash in New Jersey, I think, and this was the first time that I saw it, this tweet. But I don't follow this person. No one that I followed retweeted this. This came up because I was using TweetDeck to organize all of that chaos that's happening in the world and kind of funnel it down to the right information at the right time. So yeah, as we say, if it's happening on Twitter, and that really attracts people who care about like all of that information at scale. So information junkies, power users, and especially journalists for whom what's happening in the world is a real profession. So TweetDeck, if you don't know it, and I didn't see how many people put their hands up, but it sounds like a few of you know, some of you don't. It's basically a tool that helps you organize Twitter. You customize it yourself into what matters to you. So if you care about kind of following tech news, then you can follow a bunch of feeds that give you all of that information, or whatever kind of matters to you. So it's sort of like a flexible power user tool. And I'll come back to talking about the sort of unique challenges of that in a little bit, but I wanted to start off by talking about how I got here, because I think my journey isn't necessarily a typical one for a lot of product managers, especially ones in maybe Silicon Valley kind of roles. I went to uni and I studied English because English, I think, is the subject you do when you don't really know what you want to do afterwards. It's like a bit non-committal. And as I was studying, everyone's like, oh, you're going to be a teacher, right? I think, I didn't know what I wanted to do after I graduated, but I did know I didn't want to be a teacher, so I needed to figure something else out. I guess what's important to note is doing English isn't typical. There was a kind of 2013 survey by Mind the Product where they asked product managers, what's your educational background? And 50% said science and engineering, 38% said business, 20% said arts. I think it adds up to more than 100% because people maybe have more than one degree. But I guess it kind of highlights that there's not really a typical background. People come into it from different routes. But for me, the most important thing there is that there's a preconception that you need to have an engineering background. You need to know how to code. You need to have done that as a job in order to be a product manager. I think that's a terrible misconception that's put out there, and I think companies who put that as a requirement on their product manager roles are missing out on a huge depth and breadth of experience that actually makes product managers well-rounded people. After I graduated, I didn't know what to do. I went and sold snowboards for a little while, as you do. And this, I think, is important because this was, I guess, my first kind of taste of like translating technical information into something that makes sense to someone who's buying a snowboard. So like you walk into a snowboard store and you want to buy a snowboard, you look at the one with the coolest graphic, it's totally the wrong snowboard for you. And so I need to learn really quickly how to persuade people that the board they need is the right one. So Sean White here going through the park, he needs a board that is quite stiff like lengthways, but torsionally it has the flexibility that he needs to be able to do his tricks. So did that make sense? Do you want to buy a snowboard now? Then after that, I got my first job my first tech job at a startup. I was brought on to do customer service, but very quickly I became a one-woman band. When there's three of you and you're sort of gaining customers, then you end up picking up all sorts of bits and pieces that need doing. So if it needs doing, you end up doing it in a startup. So I learned not just customer service, but I had to learn how to do design, learn a bit of Illustrator in design. I also would translate the customer's needs into sort of requirements for the app, and then speak to the development team who are in Poland, make sure that it was all set for launch and everything. And I didn't know at the time, but it turns out that what I was doing is this thing called product management. Who knew? So the first lesson, and I think maybe one of the most important, was thinking about to what Ed was talking about earlier, like when you don't know what you want to do, then be curious. And that's something that really helped me kind of in the early stages of my career figure out what I liked doing, what I enjoyed. So that was my first lesson. After that, I went and worked at another startup, and this was like kind of doing a product role. And I immediately felt completely out of my depth. Like I didn't belong there. This girl amongst all these like male developers. I must sound like an absolute idiot. but it was an amazing kind of baptism of fire. So I ended up sort of basically running a lot of the consumer product, needing to work really quickly, really fast-paced, failing fast on a lot of what we were building. And what was amazing about this time was, I guess, that I learned that product management wasn't just about you have this cool idea and you translate it into like this new feature that you give and they build it and it magically happens. Actually, I learned that you need to develop your leadership muscles to kind of persuade people why we need to do these things. And so that was a kind of really awesome experience. This was an example of firefighting week. I ran this. We basically had a bunch of bugs in the app. There were too many of them. Like, it was causing all sorts of headaches. So instead of turning them into chores, we turned them into a game. And we got all of the development team for the whole week to just bash through the backlog of bugs. And every time we would ship one, then they had this little bell that they would ring. And it was brilliant at kind of creating a culture of fun around something that otherwise in development is actually kind of boring. So yeah, for me, this was a time where I learned, even though I felt completely out of my depth, don't write yourself off, because you're still learning, you're still figuring out how you can do this job. I think there was an article this week that said you should feel uncomfortable in your job for 2 years. So yeah, that was a great lesson for me. After that company, I went to work for a media organization, the Press Association, which is like this all-hallowed institution. They're 150 years old, so very different to the like super fast-moving startups that I'd been in before. And this was, I guess, a kind of wake-up call. Like, a media company undergoing a digital transformation, there are a lot of things that kind of felt frustrating in the processes, but it was so interesting being part of the media and understanding like how this information gets processed. This was a lesson that I took from this time, and I think that this is something that comes quite late when you're building things. You need to have some difficult lessons in prioritizing the wrong things, like prioritizing what seems like the easiest in the short term, or prioritizing what you think is a cool idea. If it's not going to sell, then it's completely a waste of time. So while I was there, we built some cool stuff, like web version of the Newswire. That's great. New images, PA images website. That's really cool. But we also built an app for the royal baby. Like, there was an audience for it, yeah, a small niche of people, but did the world really need an app for the royal baby? No. So I think that this is a crucial lesson when you're learning how to be a product manager. Like, be rigorous about it. Does this product have a long-term future? And then after that, I came to Twitter, which was brilliant to go from a news organization to really understand how journalism works, into Twitter, where journalists are getting their information. Like, this is the Newswire these days, TweetDeck, for kind of journalists. That's our core audience who we're building for. And being a customization tool, it's kind of complicated. There's a lot going on. Like, every kind of Twitter timeline, we have it in there. Like, you can send tweets. And so not long after I joined, I came across this. There's a great book by a company called Intercom. It's called Intercom on Product Management, which is a great read. I think it's free. If not, it's a couple of quid. Go buy it. And they ended up kind of making like a little mini site with these funny graphics called Product Strategy Means Saying No.com. And I read this one where it says, but we can make it optional. In case you don't know, there are lots of things that are optional in TweetDeck. And this little kind of dog guy says, no, why not? Are you trying to become a mobile collaboration tool that can send invoices, schedule tweets, and make coffee? Optional features lead to bloatware with no clear focus. I read this and I buried my head in my hands because it's sort of half describing the product that I work on. Oh my God, like we are trying to become a mobile collaboration tool that can schedule tweets, oh my God. And so this leads us on to what I think is the biggest lesson that I have taken from working at Twitter, which is #simplify. The more complex you are, the more you need to think in terms of simplifying what you build. So for example, we had 2 ways to log in to TweetDeck. Back in 2013, you could log in with a TweetDeck account or you could log in with a Twitter account. And that's kind of not ideal. Like, we needed to maintain 2 separate systems. Like, one is in Twitter's infrastructure over here, one is in like our own infrastructure that we need to like maintain, we need to make sure the hardware is working properly. But we don't want to like make people create a brand new account. We needed a way to make sure they didn't lose their setup. TweetDeck users are really like, I guess, finicky because they're such power users. They feel so passionately about the products that we work on. So we had to figure out how to get them to migrate their accounts over, which was an incredibly painful process. It took us 2 years to get from where we started to where we wanted to be in the end. And so, in fact, like earlier this year, we finally kind of completed this accounts project. And I guess the thing with this is that it really highlights like nothing is simple, and so you need to plan like these infrastructure projects like really far in advance, and kind of hide all of that complexity to the users. So all they see is like 3 little steps to transfer their account. They don't see the 2 years of work that went into like making all of this happen. Actually, like this is maybe a bit too long a process still. Like we probably could have simplified this more, looking back. So yeah, just as we were finishing off this big accounts project, if you were a user, maybe you'll remember, we made a change this year where you now log in with the same Twitter account that you're logged into on twitter.com and analytics.twitter.com, and it's basically like a shared Twitter cookie was the final culmination of this project. And to get it over the line, we needed to make a really difficult decision. We had to make the decision to kill off our native Windows app. And we don't take that lightly, but this is the kind of decision when you're dealing with this complexity, and to get anything done, you need to #simplify. And to a certain extent, you need to kind of learn how to kill these things that are really meaningful to you and really meaningful to your users. And that comes with the territory, making those tough decisions. So this is, I guess, a rubric that I use to help me when I'm needing to make these decisions. And I think the most important thing here, one of the kind of big lessons that I've taken from being at Twitter is that there are hidden costs. So every feature that you build, every new thing that you ship, the story doesn't end on the day that it gets released out into the world. There's feedback that you need to learn from, usage metrics that you need to learn from, but there's also long-term maintenance costs. So you need to weigh up the impact of that feature on the kind of core flow that you're trying to get people to complete versus the usage. So if the impact's high and the usage is high, you should invest. If it's any of these other things, like maybe think about it. And if the impact's low and the usage is low, you need to get rid of that product. Kill your babies. They aren't actually really humans. It's just products, and users might be attached to them, but if it's not driving value, then it's just harming you in the long term. So if you know the myth of Sisyphus, he was basically, it's a Greek myth. Sisyphus was punished by the gods for gifting man fire. And his punishment was to roll a boulder up a hill for all eternity. Albert Camus used this as a metaphor to describe the futility of life. And I'm using it as a metaphor to describe technical debt in products that are several years old. So unless you prioritize, unless you treat your technical debt and plan long-term for it, as a product manager, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Technical debt isn't just an engineer's problem, it's a strategic roadmap problem as well. Not so sexy, but I think final lesson that I've learned, and this I think kind of sums it up a lot for me when I was talking about culture, is that building products, shipping software, writing code, what you end up interacting with, it's not something that kind of just pops into someone's brain and gets released and you end up using it. But it takes a team of humans, fallible humans, to build it. And that team needs to work amazingly well together to kind of drive towards the right goal. So without the team, nothing gets done. And of course, final note, without our users, we wouldn't be anything. So it's such a privilege to get to work on a product where people are like so amazingly vocal about everything that we build, and it just makes my job kind of worth going into the office for every day. So thank you.